Hello and welcome to the Healthy Minds Speaker Series. So glad you could join us today. World Suicide Prevention Day was recognized this year on September 10th. And this is the topic that we're going to discuss today. So today's session is going to probably feel a little bit heavier than some of the ones that we've had in the past. But I think it's a critical one for us all to understand as we think about the impact that suicide can have on ourselves, on our loved ones, and our coworkers. When you think of suicide, often there's a stigma attached. And when we look in terms of mental health, the whole view of our program is the idea of you are not alone. In today's session, we're going to look at this important topic in a bit of a different way. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have 3 different speakers, and we're going to have an opportunity to hear from them in a moment. And then we're going to open up to a panel. So like always, we want to hear from you. It's the interaction with each of you that really brings this to life. But to create a bit of context in terms of looking at the impact of suicide, Statistics Canada has said that between 2014 and 2018, there was an average of 4,121 suicides per year. It's just a staggering number when you think about it. And in 2015, there were 3,396,000 Canadians aged 12 and above who had suicidal thoughts. So as we can tell, this is a very significant problem and one that we probably don't talk enough about. In fact, based upon these stats, today in Canada, it would be expected, based on that 10 people will end their lives by suicide today, and up to 200 others would actually attempt to do so. So thank you for joining, though, in an important discussion. Today, I am very pleased to welcome back Orlando Da Silva. And Orlando was actually one of our first speakers that we had when we introduced our mental health approach to Maple Leaf. It was in the fall of 2019, and Orlando shared a really vulnerable story of his own experience with depression and a suicide attempt. And it really had a significant impact on all of us. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I encourage you to look on our mental health site, and we have a video of it there. Orlando has a really impressive background. It's quite startling. He was a bencher, so the governor of the Law Society of Ontario, which regulates the 55,000 lawyers and 12,000 paralegals that we have. He served as the past president and CEO of the Ontario Bar Association. And while he was in that role, he led a mental health initiative to bring a focus on mental health to the legal profession. All of his work has been recognized in a number of different ways, but more recently he's been recognized as one of the top 25 most influential lawyers in Canada. Orlando, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter, very much for that kind introduction.
And I'll just introduce the other speakers, and then I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes.
The next speaker we have is Dr. Shanna Prinsloo. And Dr. Prinsloo is part of Inkblot. And you've heard us on these sessions talk a lot about the excellent treatment that we can receive through online therapy. And she's in charge of their clinical practices. And she has a special desire and passion for reducing the stigma and bringing mental health care to people more broadly. Her areas of specialty include broad mental health and also substance abuse and treating people with trauma. Dr. Prinsloo, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. And the last person that you see here, probably a lot of you recognize, I imagine, and that is Janet Riley. And Janet is our VP of Corporate Communications. And Janet has agreed to be here today to talk about how the death of a loved one by suicide has touched her. And so each person has their own perspective that they're bringing to the table, and I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have. So we're going to start, Orlando, if we could begin with you, just a chance to tell more of your story and some of what brought you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for that kind introduction. As I said, I talk about mental health issues quite a bit and have started back in 2014 when I was the president of the Bar Association because of my personal, deeply personal connection to mental health issues and in particular my lived experience with it. One of the things that struck me, though, is that I was learning as I was trying to decide whether to tell anybody. Up to this point, I kept my depression a secret from my family and colleagues for over 40 years. I'd learned that lawyers, or my profession, were 4 times more likely to suffer from depression than the rest of society. So some of those numbers that you went through in your introduction, you know, if you can imagine, it's that much worse for lawyers, oddly enough. And that lawyers are ranked amongst the professions 4th who die by suicide, behind dentists who are 1st, pharmacists 2nd, and physicians 3rd. If you think about it for a moment, you know, those top 3 have easier access to the means to end their lives than lawyers do. What's more, in 2016, there was a study out of the U of T sociology department that said that the more successful a lawyer was, the more likely they were to be depressed, which makes almost no sense at first glance. But there was something about the pursuit of success as traditionally defined that made lawyers suffer. So when I became president of the OBA, I wanted to do something about it, you know, to help us talk some more, because there really was nothing out there at the time, except for perhaps booths with some pamphlets and stuff that no one would be caught dead approaching, lest they convey the image of someone needing therapy or something like that. During the course of the, you know, me speaking about it, I learned, you know, that there are 3 million Canadians who are suffering depression at any time. I think that accords with some of the statistics you cited, where there are 3 million with actual suicidal ideation. According to the Canadian Medical Health Association, one of the things that really struck me, though, of all of the statistics, the most poignant one was that only 49% of Canadians who responded to this survey said they would socialize with a friend, and I want to underline the word friend here, who has a serious mental illness. So it's as if to say, as soon as you tell somebody that you suffer, like I do, from major depressive disorder, you will lose half of your friends. And that illustrates the stigma to me more powerfully than any other statistic. But there was one anecdote I wanted to convey that I cannot forget. And that relates to a time I gave a talk in honor of Paul Beeston, who some of you may know was president of the Blue Jays and then eventually Major League Baseball for a while. It was at Kerner Hall in downtown Toronto. So there are a lot of people, but the point is, a woman in her mid-40s approached me and said, you know, she didn't want to tell me much about her life other than her daughter, who was 14 years old, died by suicide 4 months earlier, just before Christmas of that year, 2016. And she left a note. She didn't tell me anything about the note except for one part that she wanted me to know and presumably never forget. And that is, her daughter wrote, "Please, Mom, don't tell anyone." For me, that's the reason I speak about this issue, the cause that I want to fight. It's an illustration of the stigma and its profound and malicious strength. It's something that I want us all to fight, and I hope you'll join me in that. I suffer from a condition called dysthymia, chronic low-grade depression that escalates into a major depressive episode every 3 or 4 years, starting when I was 9 years old. At the time, of course, I didn't know what depression was, and I just thought I was introverted, and people said I was shy, maybe too serious. You don't think of it as a mental illness. You just think, you know, as a young boy that you're in fact worthless. And then eventually as a teenager, you feel like you're a worthless teenager. And I assure you that one day as a man, you become to think that you're a worthless man as well. And so as I grew older and matured, and even as I enjoyed some success, my mood would always oscillate from this low-grade depression to major depressive episodes every 3 or 4 years. And these depressive episodes would take me to the darkest places where for hours at a time, sometimes all night long, all I could think of was how to end this pain and this grief. But no one could tell. I disguised it. I was very high functioning. It didn't visibly affect me. And I learned to show it more with a mask on as intensity and determination and hard work. And I continue to function and achieve success by all outward appearances, never missing a beat or a deadline. What I worry about with this story is that the takeaway may be that for all of the people online, for all of the people that you work with, the people in your family, your loved ones, you may never know unless they tell you that they are suffering, especially the highest functioning among them. For the best and brightest amongst us, the last thing that goes to work, the last thing that goes is work, pardon me. And in my case, as is often the case, it can be passed on, this depression, genetically. Everyone in my father's family, for example, suffered from severe major depression. He self-medicated with alcohol until he died at the age of 51. His sister suffered attempted suicide violently, dying a few years ago at the age of 76. Their grandfather took his own life at the age of 48. You know, on April 26th of next year, I'll be 54, but my brush with death came at the age of 40 in 2008. A time of year much like this, right after an election campaign, federal election campaign in which I was a candidate. I worked very hard the year before to win the nomination, and the good news was that I did win the nomination. But I lost my marriage, and I immediately fell into this depressive major depressive episode. But I tried to distract myself, you know, by thinking that, you know, if I win this election, everything will be better. The success will cure this mood that's impeding my life, and the thing I learned through that exercise is that success isn't the cure. It doesn't matter how successful you are. And we see that with celebrities like Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade and Robin Williams, that success isn't the cure for depression. Hope is. And in my case, I didn't win the election. You know, in an instant afterwards, within 24 hours, the work, support, distraction, all of that were gone, and I was left alone with my depressive cycle. And it started to make me feel foolish. I lost my family. I lost the election. I shouldn't have tried. I thought I was embarrassed. I embarrassed myself, my community, my family. And as that negative spiral continued, I started to think that I didn't deserve my work, respect, career, friends, love, and worst of all, that I didn't deserve any help. So I didn't ask for any. And I started to think that those that I loved would be better off without me in the world. And I remember thinking when I was first speaking about this, Robin Williams had just died by suicide, and some celebrity said, well, I have no sympathy for him. Suicide is the most selfish act you can commit because you're only thinking of your own pain and not the pain that you're causing others. And I reflected on that and thought when I was going through this, all I could think of was that it was the greatest act of love. because I was depriving the people around me, the people I loved and who loved me, of the decrepit human being that I had felt I'd become, and their lives would be better for it. Late in the evening on December 18th, 2008, I took 180 sleeping pills, a 6-month supply with 2 bottles of wine. And when I realized what I had done, that I would likely die that night, it occurred to me that I hadn't said goodbye to my daughter, who was 8 years old at the time and would never have that opportunity. But I managed, without being able to see anything, to speed dial my estranged wife, who called 911 because I couldn't speak either. And I spent the next 6 months in the hospital. I told no one why I was gone. I told work, it was a physical problem. I told family I was too busy at work. And I missed Christmas and Mother's Day and Valentine, all of those things, and upsetting the family quite a bit. But I was so afraid of the stigma that people would treat me differently. Wouldn't get the trials I was used to getting. My family would love me less. Clients would think I was weak, too weak to fight their causes. And nothing could kill a trial lawyer's career more than that, because nothing cries out weakness and vulnerability. At least I thought, more than depression and other mood disorders. I tried to learn from the experience, by developing a 10-point scale and becoming more introspective about what my mood is. So I assigned myself a number every day. 10 is happiness I've never felt. 8 would be my best case scenario. 6, that's sort of low grade cruising altitude. 5, the onset of problems. 3, a decline so severe that I need to get help from others. I'm trying to reflect, what does a 3 mean? It's so important as a trigger for me to get help for others, and I could never define it in words that adequately conveyed what I felt. But I remember reading A Tale of Two Cities in my 20s, and because it resonated with me, this particular passage, I almost instantly memorized it. For me, it captures a 3. Sadly, the sun rose. It rose upon no sadder sight than the man of good abilities and good emotions, incapable of their directed use or exercise, incapable of his own help or happiness, sensible about the blight upon him, and resigning himself to let it eat him away. In my view, if you ever feel that way, you're at a 3 or below, and you need to get help. So the secret for me that I learned from this experience is to save myself from myself. I could never let my mood fall below a 3 again. And how do you do that? You have to be able to talk to somebody. And I was too afraid to do that. The fear was so strong. But someone needs to know when you're at a 3 or below, because all you want to do is isolate yourself. And that's the worst thing for you. It deprives you of the vital connections that drive you to do more, to be more, to love, and to be loved, and lets your irrational thoughts grow in strength and credibility. If left unchecked, it can persuade you, the intelligent, successful, admired person that you are, to seek a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But no one can help you if you don't feel comfortable enough to tell them about your own 10-point scale. To do that, we have to put an end to the stigma and normalize the discussion around mental health. My own hope is that we can continue to move the ball forward together, to break the pattern of people suffering in silence until they are beyond help. And to do that, for your part, I humbly ask that you continue the discussion beyond this afternoon's seminar. Continue to support and value the work that Maple Leaf is doing. But most of all, undertake to take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Create a safe place around you where mental health issues can be discussed without ridicule, scorn, or judgment. And keep reminding us all when we need reminding, and I continue to need reminding, that there is always better days to come. There was always hope. And you can use me as an example. You know, it's been 13 years since my suicide attempt, but I am still alive. My family loves me. I have a great career. I got remarried to a wonderful, beautiful bride. I have 3 wonderful daughters, and I get to share some time with you here today. I said a few minutes ago that I had taken 180 pills with 2 liters of wine back in 2008. I learned a few years ago that the lethal dose for someone my size is 30 tablets. I'm lucky that I survived. I'm so happy I didn't succeed, because if I had succeeded, I would not have known how full of love my life would become. I would not have experienced such a meaningful and rewarding professional life. And my daughters would not have had the opportunity to teach me of everything that is beautiful in this world. Because of that, even in my darkest days, I will always know that I am indeed a lucky man, and that will always give me hope. Thank you.
Orlando, thank you so much for your vulnerability and just the hope that is in your story. And there is so much to unpack there. So thank you. We're going to change gears now, and we're going to go to Janet. And Janet, suicide touched your life in a different way. And can I hand it over to you to share some of your story? You're on mute, Janet. And I think we're having a bit of technical problems, but we'll just give it a minute. So I think what we'll do, well, I think Janet's going to call in. So we'll give it a minute right now, but let's not waste any time in terms of having a discussion. So I'd like to maybe ask a question, Orlando, and the stats that you've shared, are very significant. One that does come out, though, is that I've read that males are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than females. And you talk about stigma, and do you have any sense in terms of what's getting in the way and what we can do, and Dr. Prinsloo will open this to you also, how we can uniquely support this group because it's been impacted even more?
I have no particular expertise except that I am a man, and I would hypothesize that it has something to do with what some people call toxic masculinity. Mm-hmm. You know, really, for me, as I said, not only as a lawyer is there stigma, but as a man, you feel like, it's a denigrating expression of weakness to admit that you're suffering. You need someone's help to carry through. You need encouragement. You feel worthless. I grew up in a household where I was told to suck it up. Don't cry. That's the last thing you should do. Don't show people that you're weak. If that carries through as part of your personality into adulthood, as a man, your instinct is to not not tell people how you're feeling. It becomes very uncomfortable to show emotion, except perhaps anger. And I think that's very unhealthy and a sad statement. Um, I believe there's statistics that show women report suffering from depression in much greater numbers than men, but men die by suicide in greater numbers, and I think that's partly because they're afraid to ask for help. And one of the major reasons I speak up as a man on this issue.
Yeah, Orlando, coupling exactly on what you just said, the stigma around mental health, especially among men, is huge, and is really something that we need to be working every day to overcome. It's only recently that we're starting to enter into a period of where our sons are not being taught to, big boys don't cry. All of that really, really, it goes a long way in affecting men's ability to actually want to reach out and say, you know what, I'm struggling, I need help. And until we start looking at the way that we are also, that we speak to boys and men in general about mental health and mental wellness and taking care of our mental health, and just what that entails, we're going to struggle to move forward in that field. So I am so with you on really destigmatizing mental health and what that means, and taking care of our mental wellness before we're at a point, before we're at that 3 that you spoke of.
What are there's a question here. Oh, sorry, Orlando, please.
No, I was just going to add to that. One of the things that I continue to struggle with in talking about my own condition is that I don't want to disappoint people. Depression is something that comes and goes episodically with me. And I could tell even my family, look, they'll ask me how I'm doing, and I don't want to say I'm not doing well, because then they think maybe they're failing at something, maybe medications I'm on are not working. And I don't want to be the cause of that disappointment. So I even have to, despite all of the openness I've tried to demonstrate on this issue, I still face the concern about disappointing my family and friends. And so there's this self-stigma that a person can impose on themselves, because I want to demonstrate that I'm fighting this successfully, but I can't always, and I need their help, and I hate asking for it, but I do it anyway because the consequences of not doing it can be so grave.
And there's a number of comments here in the questions. And folks, a reminder, if you have any questions, just click on the right-hand corner and you can ask your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But people, Orlando, they're thanking you for your openness. Many comments on that. But there's a question here directly in terms of looking, what has been the impact on your family and your daughters? And is there any advice that you have for family members who have someone who suffers? I think you've touched on that, but anything else that you would like to add?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit in the end there with the question, but I could start off with the first part of it. The impact was muted for my family because they didn't know in 2008 that I was going through such a crisis. It was not until 2014 that some 6 years later that they realized I was that close to dying and that I had suffered that much. And in hindsight, I would have handled it differently, I think. What I did was an interview with a small newspaper that was then picked up by the Toronto Star and was put on the front page under the fold. And that's how my daughter found out, which I regret. So I had to have a long conversation with her. My family, of origin, were surprised, but even now, I don't think they like to talk about it with me at all. My family today is much more open about these issues, and they talk about their own moods. They have their own 10-point scale, so we sort of have a shorthand where my wife can look at me and say, "You look like you're about a 5 today. Is there anything I can do?" And it's wonderful when that happens. And I can have the open discussions with my 3 daughters about how they're feeling, and there's no inhibition to tell me when they're feeling sad, depressed, anxious, angry. We can have these really open discussions, and to me, that's the good part of it. The sad part of it is sometimes they fear, like when I'm in a depressive mood, you know, can they help me enough? And I struggle with it when they feel that they're responsible, and I assure them that they're not. Um, but on balance, a lot of good has come out of it, and they know that I love them a great deal. My eldest daughter gets a lot of benefit from talking to me about her anxiety and things. So that's what I would say there. Now, sorry, I missed the second question because of Wi-Fi connection issues. So if you wanted to do that or move on, I'm happy. I'm in your hands.
No, yeah, no, I think you covered it already, so thank you. And Janet, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Orlando. This is the second time I've heard you speak, and I find your story so inspiring. Now, I'm no expert on suicide, but I have had more experience with it than anyone ever should. In fact, I've had 5 experiences with it, and I'm just going to talk about a few today. And as a result, I've read a lot about suicide, and I've often said that if I chucked corporate life and took up a cause, I think it would be suicide prevention and support, because I know how important it is. And I'm also a storyteller, so I'm going to tell you some stories today in hopes that they are informative or helpful in some way. And so I'm about to go to my 35th college reunion, and I'm going to take you back to college with me, to my college boyfriend. His name was Dave, and he was a very kind and gentle soul. He was a runner. He ran the Chicago Marathon. He was a Grateful Dead head, an outdoorsman, and an artist. He was a potter, and he even made mugs like this one, and his name's even in the bottom, Lubers, of this mug that he made for me. And during college, he began to have struggles with mental illness. He actually one time thought his watch was a time machine and was found wandering the streets of Chicago. He had to leave school and be hospitalized, and he was treated with lithium, which is a very serious drug. And it began, a long journey for him and a lot of struggle. And it was hard to watch. And I took a poetry class at Northwestern, and I actually wrote a sonnet in iambic pentameter about his struggles, and it was called Tempered Fears. And the poem comes up later in my story again. The poem actually won an award, which was a source of great pride. And Dave went off to grad school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he took the poem with him and said that it really captured how he felt. We remained close friends until we were 38. While he was in grad school, he came out, and he had a really wonderful partner named Doug, who took care of him throughout his ups and downs. But then when I was 38, I received a phone call, and I was told that Dave had hung himself. It took me about 24 hours to find out more details about it. I reached his mother. So for 24 hours, I wondered how this kind and gentle person had done this, and I assumed he had overdosed. I was absolutely shocked to find out that he had hung himself. He had overdosed twice before, but had been saved. And in this case, he took an approach that ensured he would succeed. I was invited to his memorial, where I read the poem I referenced earlier. And while I was visiting Minneapolis on business, I had the opportunity to see his mother and to go to a support group with her, where I learned that it's very normal when you're grieving from suicide to crave information. And that was the situation I was in. I was reading about suicide all the time to try to wrap my brain around it. And I told people that it was a little bit like a mind fuck. That was the only way I could describe it. It was so hard to understand because suicide was so contrary to the human survival instinct. I also wanted a note. I wanted to understand why. Why didn't he leave a letter? But at the support group, I learned that when people actually take their lives, they're in such a state of mind that the letters generally don't make any sense. And I was directed to a book by Kay Redfield Jamison, who's a psychiatrist and a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and she's the author of Night Falls Fast. She herself has bipolar disorder, like Dave did, and she describes her experience so clearly, and she actually shares some of the suicide letters that have been left by some of her patients, and it did make clear that notes really aren't helpful in understanding this unthinkable act. And through her book, I came to envision him in a bit of a black pit and holding on by his fingertips. And we were standing at the top and we were offering him a hand and we were encouraging him to keep trying. And a lot of times he could, but then unfortunately there was a day where he was just exhausted and he slipped and he fell back and he took his life. So he certainly didn't die from a lack of love, because that was quite impossible, but he died from a disease that is incredibly difficult to treat. And in an uncanny coincidence, a year later, I was at a birthday party of my friend's child, and I met his sister, and her name was Rakita Vazirani, and I wasn't aware at the time that she was a very famous poet, but she did tell me she was a professor of poetry at Emory University. And so I told her the story of Dave and of my poem and his struggle with mental illness. And we had a very nice conversation. And then 2 weeks later, I picked up my Washington Post, and she was on the front page of the Washington Post. And the day before, she took her own life and the life of her child because she herself struggled with bipolar disorder. I later learned that her father had also committed suicide. And I had always been told he died when they were children, but I never knew the cause. And so it speaks to that genetic connection. But again, I had those feelings that I had when Dave died. You know, what if I hadn't told her about him? What if I hadn't mentioned that poem? What if I hadn't discussed mental illness or suicide with her? Would the outcome have been different? I had that same feeling in response to Dave's death, where I wanted to turn the clock back. What if I had called? What if I had done something different? How could we have changed the outcome? At this time, I know that that conversation was more coincidence in terms of her death than anything else, but it definitely shook me. But then 3 years ago, the phone rang, and it was my sister calling to tell me that her ex-husband and my niece's father had just hung himself, leaving only a note that said, "Sorry." My niece lives in Arlington, Virginia, not far from me, and I jumped in my car and drove frantically to see her. And I remember the sensation I had in my body, and it brought back to me my first experience in trying to process the act of suicide. And I felt so badly for her because I knew what she was facing. And she indeed asked the question, what if I had called? He sent me a card this week telling me that he loved me, that he was proud of me. What if I had called him instead of waited until today to think about texting him? Could I have changed the outcome? It was very, very sad, but I did help her find a program that helped her process her experience. And it was with other people who had lost loved ones to suicide. She went through it and she found it very helpful. So in thinking about this talk, I actually called Dave's mother and spoke with her for an hour, and we rehashed the whole experience, and I tried to come up with any great insights that I could offer. And I don't know that I have anything magic to tell you, but here's what's occurred to me. Be informed, and that's what you're doing today by attending this session. Take suicidal thoughts and expressions seriously. Engage in them. Don't shy away from them. If someone says they're thinking about taking their life, tell them what a terrible loss that would be to you and to the world. Don't normalize the expression, I could kill myself. It shouldn't be normalized. Do what you can to lead someone who's struggling to resources that might help. Encourage them to get help. Know that you cannot be fully responsible when someone you love completes a suicide, because if you were fully responsible, no one you love would ever complete a suicide. And if they do, get help for yourself, because it's a very, very hard and painful experience that I hope you never experience. Thank you.
So folks, and unfortunately, we don't have that much time left, and you've written in a number of really important questions. And so what I will say is that we'll have a follow-up session in terms of where we can get to some of these questions, recognizing that we don't want people to feel unsatisfied kind of with the responses that they get. We have on the screen here some of the resources. We've got some crisis line numbers here that are available. If this discussion today has spurred anything, any thoughts, and you want to talk to someone, there's numbers here. We also have the access to our Maple Leaf mental health resources, and I just encourage you to reach out if at all you think it would be helpful. The session today, in terms of looking at the World Suicide Prevention, the theme that they had this year is creating hope through action. And so I thought what we could do is end and hear from each one of you, please, in terms of what are your ideas in terms of we can all start doing in small ways to be creating hope through action on this important topic. Dr. Prinsloo, can we start with you?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that came to mind as you were asking that question was keeping in mind about the language that we use when we're talking about individuals that are experiencing mental health disorders. For me, in my little perfect world, in my mind, that something that I would like to create is, you know, when you ask someone, you know, how they're doing, you see that they have a cast on their arm, for example. And you ask them and they go, oh yeah, I fell, I broke my arm, I had to go to the doctor, they took care of it. In my perfect world, I would like to be able to say to someone, how are you doing? And they indicate, yeah, I'm struggling with depression at the moment. I am actively seeking help though. I am speaking with my psychologist, but I'm really grateful that you asked. You know, maybe we can have lunch and, you know, sit and chat about it. So just really normalizing it in the same way that you go to see your doctor to talk about physical ailments, and you share that with your friends, being able to share that you are struggling with depression, that you are struggling with anxiety, whatever the case is, and know that it's going to be met with kindness, with it's something being completely normal, and that's something that any one of us can experience. Absolutely anybody is vulnerable to experiencing mental health concerns as well as experiencing bouts of depression. So I will leave that there.
No, I love how you normalize it. Orlando, your thoughts?
One thing that helped me that may surprise some people, often when you're in a depressive cycle and you're isolating yourself, people notice. And I've over time developed networks and friendships of people who check in on me, and they'll send me notes saying, you don't seem like yourself, I hope everything's okay, what you did here meant a lot to me, just checking in. And I've heard from others that, you know, when they do that, they don't get a response and they feel frustrated and that they can't do anything to help. But I wanted everyone on the call here to know that it helped me enormously to get those things, even if I couldn't respond, because I saved every one of them. And I would read and reread them and continue to do so, so that when I'm in a low mood, I have something that I can instantly resort to remind myself that I'm not this worthless human being that my brain keeps insisting that I am. So I would encourage, building on what Shanna said, to sort of authentically communicate with people. How are you doing? And look for the response beyond the fine that we automatically answer. Making that authentic connection makes the world a difference. And so try to be that person.
Oh, that's great. And Janet.
Same question, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think what Orlando said is so, I love the idea of the letters, and I engaged in so much of that with Dave, just constant writing and reminding, and like I said, trying to reach into that black pit where he was in hopes that he would have the energy to reach out.
So thank each of you for being here today. Thank you for your openness, and to all those people who are watching online and participating through questions, thank you. We all know that it's through conversations like this that we bring things out from the dark into the open, into the light of day, where we can have healthy conversations and bring things forward in productive ways. So again, if you need support at all, resources are here to be available. Thank you for joining. To our guests, thank you for being with us. And to each of you, I wish you a great rest of the day.